From the low desert in beautiful Tempe, Arizona, this is Politics in the Past, Desert Dialogues, usually with Rob Ferguson, but today with Jack Henrichs. Rob has stepped out, and I have stepped into the hosting chairs for this week. And this week, I am delighted to be joined by a very good friend of mine, Gio Barbaro, who is a newly graduated history, no longer student, but history alumni of Arizona State University, and is the current Dean's Medalist, or one of the Dean's Medalists for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. Welcome, Gio, to the podcast.
Thank you, Jack. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Gio's been a very, very good friend of mine for a few years now. We are both proud members of the Bob Dylan Listening Club at Arizona State University. And Gio wrote an incredible honors thesis about the Italian resistance during the Second World War that I wanted to talk about. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about that Dean's Medalist honor. Could you explain to our listeners what exactly that is?
Yeah, so every semester for every graduate, the college picks one student per school in the college. So there's like 20 schools in the college. Every school gets a student that they pick that is nominated to be the most outstanding graduate. So um, it was pretty special. The people department that I work for within the college, within the school, was nominated me. So that was nice to um, get recognition from uh, my bosses, you know. But yeah, the it's been a history student the last 2 or 3 years, so it's been nice to carry that tradition on. So
Absolutely. Showing the the acumen of the history students here at Arizona State University. You mentioned the work that you do in the history department. What is that
Mhm.
work? What work are you doing for them?
so I work within the public history department, which is it's a there's a broader committee about like 7 to 10 people, but the actual department itself only has about 3 people in it. My direct supervisor and a few other professors, and um, they work with Arizona museums and archives, and sometimes outside of Arizona, to create public history projects, which is basically public history is how history interacts with the world, right? So um, a lot of their projects have to do with digitizing archives and making them accessible for people. Um, they were a big hand in creating the first COVID-19 archive, and the largest one in the world is online and ran by ASU. So that was a public history project as well. So I'm kind of their assistant when it comes to that. I do all the data entry for those archives and manage them. So
Absolutely. And how long have you been working that job?
just over a year in January. So almost a year and a half.
Sounds like a lot of fun. And so, how did you get interested in history to begin with? Was it a teacher? Was it a book? Was it your parents? How did you get into it?
There's two stories, I think. Well, there's like three. I The first thing I would say is I was really interested in the family history aspect of it. So um my dad's parents are Italian American, and they uh moved from different parts of Italy and came over. But my grandma specifically moved over from northern Italy, and she came and she lived in a small farming town in near Buffalo, New York, and it's called Fredonia is the area. And she her grandfather Giovanni, my namesake, also he built his house there and he built the farms there. So I remember when I was a kid driving through those like farm areas and hearing the stories about uh, my grandma's family, and kind of getting to see the history, where it was, and seeing the old houses and seeing the stuff like that. And, kind of realizing that nature is I read a book. I can't remember the word or the name of it, but the uh, the author argues that the shore is the only thing that everyone has been able to see. Like the only thing that where history stays stagnant, right? When you look at the shore, it looks the same as someone did 1,000 years ago, and that's kind of the similar realization I had when I was a kid. But it was more the farmland. I was, oh, this probably looked the same. The other thing, I was really interested in Charles Darwin when I was a kid. I was really into the animals type of thing, and uh, I got really interested in him and did as much research as a child could do on him when I was a kid, and then that kind of went on the background and through school, and then in high school I got a really good teacher, like you said, you know, that got me interested into the career.
Yeah. And so going forward, as you've now graduated, what are you looking to do? What's your professional hopes?
So I'm staying at ASU at least for another year to do my master's in history, and I'm getting certificates in public history and GIS to hopefully make into historic preservation. I worked with the city of Tempe, or the city of Tempe, the Tempe History Museum. They have a historic house kind of sector within their museum. There's like four or five there, so I volunteered there a few years ago, and I really enjoyed it. And so I wanted to get a hand in making that kind of thing happen more.
When
So
you volunteered there, and this is a really important question, were you one of the people who like dressed up in the costume and did the period history? Were you in a doublet and breeches?
I wish. No, I stood there and I answered questions when people had questions, but I got to talk to those people, and they were,
Yeah.
pretty interesting how they got into those type of roles.
Yeah, I've always wanted to personally be a member of a Civil War reenacting troupe. Every year in high school, I would make my Boy Scout troop go to the Pipestone, Minnesota Civil War reenactment, and they hated me for it. Uh, it was a lot of fun. So now, like now that we understand a little bit about who you are and your background, and your passion for history, I want to get in specifically to your honors thesis. Could you give the listener just a brief 1,000-foot view of what your honors thesis is about, and then we'll get into the specifics of it.
Yeah, so my thesis in total is about it's about, like you said, the Italian resistance in Italy during World War II, specifically the resistance by Italians against German occupation. So there is some resistance against the fascist movement, and to an extent, it's kind of the same people. But specifically, my work is the Italian versus German resistance, and uh, to be even narrower, it's in Turin, Italy, which is in the north west side near France and Switzerland. And that city is kind of known as a resistance city, and they're one of the cities that liberated themselves. Um, and so my thesis itself is a map that showcases places of memory. Some of the cities she has curated, some that I have curated, and we'll get into that how I did that as well. Um, and even more specifically about a woman, her name is Margherita Bertola Frey, and she was a resistance fighter in Turin during that time. So
Yeah. And how did you become interested in the Italian resistance to German occupation?
um, that's a good question. I think uh, I was interested in, I took a really good class called History in the Wild, which they've argued over that name. But it's a public history class for undergraduate students. And it was taught by my thesis director, um, Dr. Volker Benkert, and he was a great teacher, and he talked about memorials and how they influenced, how they influence memory, and how um, why we build memorials and stuff like that. And so I was initially interested in the Holocaust memorials um, in Italy, because I knew that they were going to be there, but I was interested to see um, how they would how Italians would remember a tragedy that they were directly a part of, yet they weren't necessarily the perpetrators, right? Like they were, but they weren't the mastermind behind it. And so that's where I initially got me interested. And then when I met Margarita, uh, I kind of shifted my focus into resistance. And then when I got to Italy to do the feet on the ground research, I kind of realized that resistance was going to be the thing that I needed to focus on. to
Absolutely.
make this project a good project.
Yeah. And so before we get into your discussions with Margarita, um, just to offer the listener a little bit more context, could you give us a brief synopsis of that history? Um, what was the German invasion or occupation of Italy? What did that look like? And what were those resistance movements doing?
Yeah, so Italy's kind of the cousin of France in a way, where like as I'm sure you know, the Italy was in the Axis powers, right? They were on the side of the Germans. But Italy was also the first to fall. So there was a spy program. I don't know much of the history, so I don't want to speak on it. But from what I've heard, I think it was called Operation Husky, and it was when they sent a mafia boss from the United States to Sicily to correspond with the mafia there and to get American troops into Sicily to then invade Italy from the south because they knew that's the only way they could invade because the north was German. So once America and the Allies breached the southern part of Italy, they started going up, and around this time, again, resistance had been active through this entire period. However, it is only now when Italian when once the fascist regime in Italy fell, because Mussolini had been captured, he had been hung, and the uh, and America had I think they'd reached Rome by this point, but they were cut off by the Germans in Rome, and so it was, I believe it was a stalemate during this period, and the northern part of Italy was completely German occupied, and so there were cities. Again, Rome, I believe, was American occupied, but cities like Bologna and Turin and Milan and Trieste and Bolzano were all German occupied. And so a lot of these cities it was forced to have a resistance presence to fight the German occupation. So Bologna had another big battle that was liberated by the partisans, and so was Turin. And so and while the Germans were there, however, they were continuing this plan that they had in Austria and parts of Germany where uh, in Trieste, which is a city near Slovenia or the time of Yugoslavia, they built a concentration camp. They built a concentration camp in Bolzano, um, and so they had these. However, because the fascist regime had fallen in Italy, many of the I guess Holocaust victims were Italian soldiers and partisans. They were more political enemies rather than a racial enemy. And so this is the kind of memory you see in Italy, where it's um, uh, rather than Italians forcing the blame onto the Germans, it's we were also victims of the Germans in a way, right? We were victims of the fascist regime, but we were also victims of the Germans who killed our people as well. And so in Turin specifically, they had the biggest brigade was the Garibaldi Brigade, and Garibaldi is the man who led the fight to unify Italy in 1861. But the uh, in Turin specifically, it was um, small brigades that would hide in the mountains surrounding Turin because Turin's in a valley, and so there's villages surrounding Turin in the mountains in Asti and Alba, and a lot of the resistance fighters would stay up there and come down from the mountains on bikes and run around the city and serve in the city and then come back up. And so that was kind of the day to day. But um, I believe it was 1943 when Turin was liberated. I'm not 100% sure on that date, um, but yeah.
Yeah. What a fascinating history, and I appreciate how you highlighted that tension between both being complicit and also being a victim. That must make for a fascinating historical attitude of memory, as you outline. Um, and so now getting into that, you took that class and initially became interested in Holocaust memorialization. At what point did your interest shift from remembering or analyzing remembrances of the Holocaust and memorials of the Holocaust to memorials of Italian resistance?
Um, I think That's tough to remember. I remember feeling like I meeting Margarita and kind of seeing history in person
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
was a big shift. Uh, and I knew that once I met her, I knew that I wanted to do more with the resistance because I thought that was really interesting. And hearing her story was really interesting.
Who is Margarita? Because this,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, your entire thesis is so fascinating, but this is one of the most fascinating parts.
Yeah. And so Margarita was a good friend of mine. She passed away in February of this year. She was 99 years old when she passed away. She was a little Italian woman from Turin. Um, she was 15 when she joined the resistance in Turin. She was in the Garibaldi Brigade, and her job was her name was Marissa. That was her spy name or her partisan name. And so she would go around. She would hand out fake IDs to people that so they wouldn't get deported. She would get she would send packages, and she would at some instance she was a healer sometimes. So, she has a story where she pulled somebody out of the rubble. There was a fight in like a square, and she was pulling people out of the rubble and out of the gunfire while they were on the floor, and that was her job. And she was like 15 or 16 doing this, which is absurd. And um, after the war, she married an American soldier and moved to California. Unfortunately, he passed away when she was only 36, and she had two children, and she had three or four children, and two of them passed away. So it was quite tragic. She's a autobiography called Marissa, or a biography called Marissa's Courage, and um, she moved to Arizona at some point, I believe when she was in her late 60s, 70s, and she's lived here. She was a painter, an incredible painter, and unfortunately, she had a I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was a disease. She couldn't see anymore. It's some sort of degenerative disease in her eyes. So she couldn't paint. She could paint. She said she couldn't paint, but she could still do pretty well. So
What an incredible life. Uh, so so full. I don't even know how to find the words to encompass it, the adjectives to encompass it. How did you meet her?
so I was actually from this class, History in the Wild. Um, uh, Dr. Benker is on the Phoenix Holocaust Association board. I believe he's on the board. I think he was the president for a bit. And another guy on the board named Anthony Fusco, who is the education coordinator at Arizona Jewish Historical Society, who I started interning for around this time as well. Uh, he um, he gave me Margarita's number because he had met Margarita through the Arizona Jewish Historical Association because she was Holocaust adjacent. So she wasn't Jewish herself, but her memory kind of speaks to this time period. And so he gave me Margarita's number, and then I just wanted to meet her. I realized that there was an opportunity here to meet someone really cool, and so I didn't really know I wanted to do this project yet. I had approached Dr. Benkert about being my thesis director, but I hadn't really narrowed anything down yet. And I was I was I wanted to do something about memory, and I didn't really know what. And then when I met Margarita, I said, okay, I need to do something about this too. She's way too cool of a person not to be highlighted in a project like this. And then come August, November, I committed to that. But
Do you remember your first meeting with her? Can you describe that?
yeah, it had to been it was a year ago, like probably almost on the day, or no, so I'm sorry, it was in April. Um, and I April of last year, 2025, and I drove to her house, and then I remember I stayed there for a good 2 to 3 hours the first time I met her, and she showed me all of her documents. I remember being interested to see how she moved because she was 99, but she was like running around, bending over and picking stuff up, and I was like, I remember multiple times like trying to say I got that, I'll get it, and she said no, I got it, and then she would touch her toes and bend over and pull. It was ridiculous. Um, and it was, and she like offered me coffee and cookies and stuff like that. I think some of her friends came over or something like that. So it was quite the first impression. But that was not the only. I went over there to see her like six, 8 times. So it wasn't. That was only the first time I had met her. But
How
um,
many hours in total would you say you spent with her?
um, probably close to 15.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And that she sounds like such an incredible lady.
Mm.
Um, was she, how did you ask her to be a part of your project? And was she on board right away, or was she hesitant?
She was on board right away. I
How did you pitch it to her?
Yeah. Let me think. I the second time I met her, I went with another professor who was not related to my thesis, but she wanted to meet her. I was bragging about her, and this professor said that we were like kind of getting some more information from her. I was learning more things. I told her, I said, I'm going to Torino, where you're from, or Turin, and so you need to give me recommendations, like tell me people I need to reach out to, type of thing. So we did that. And then, so she knew I had this project. She knew I was going to Italy, but she didn't really know what it was about. When I got back in August, I saw her again. I told her this is where I went. I gave her some pictures and stuff like that. And we talked about my trip. And then I said, listen, I have this project I want to do, and I want to record your story for this. So I did an oral history at some point. And so I told her, I said, I want to record your story for this, and I want to make it part of my project. And she was like, yeah, absolutely, let's do it. And I think she was like, "Let's do it right now. Like, pull out your phone and do it right now." I said, "No, I'll come back and do it later." But um, so it was immediately on board. She wanted to tell her story. It was the big thing. She'd done interviews in the past. Helped write that book. So um, it was a constant like this. Think this was kind of her life's mission at this point, was to tell her story. So because it was an incredible one,
Yeah,
of course you should tell your story.
absolutely. If you're sitting on a story that incredible. And so you mentioned there briefly that you went to Italy.
Hmm.
Um, in the interest of doing this chronologically, if we could talk about sort of your experience when you went to Italy, um, what was your plan? And then did that plan
Hmm.
change while you were there?
So yeah, the my plan. So I left for Italy in May. No, sorry, June 1st, or June 2nd last year. I was there for 6 weeks. I knew I wanted to be there for a long time. And I had been to Bolzano before, which is a city in the mountains. I knew that they had some sort of Holocaust museum, or not Holocaust museum, I'm sorry, a concentration camp there. I knew that that was there. That's all, pretty much all I knew, though. And I wasn't really sure which city I wanted to go to and research. I knew I had Marguerite as a resource, and I knew she was from Turin. So in my mind, I said, well, I can focus on Turin, and I have this incredible resource at my disposal here. However, I want to find the most interesting story, so let's, still broaden my scope a little bit. So I chose 5 cities: Torino, um, uh, Padua, Bolzano, Trieste, and Bologna. And I got pretty lucky. Again, I'd been to Bolzano before. I had family in Torino, and I had friends that were in Bologna at the time. So the trip, I don't want to say my decision to go to Bologna or my decision to go to Bolzano was solely based on I'd been there, I have friends there, but that certainly helped encourage me to go. And um, I spent about a week and a half. I was planning on spending a week in each city, and then the last week I would go to whichever city was most prevalent to me to do my like final research. So I left it all up in the open. I was getting Airbnbs days before I had to be there. It was not planned out at all, except for the fact that I need to be in these cities. I was in Trino for about a week and immediately fell in love with the city. I knew pretty much right away. I said, "This is the city I should do." I think I went to the museum the second day, and I said, "I need to do the city." I went to Padua. I was there for a few days, and I said, "You know what? There's a really cool memorial here. It's like it's something I'd like to write a paper on or something, but it's not really worth doing a whole project on." I went to the museum, and did a little movie screening just for me. They put English subtitles on just for me because they knew that I was a researcher and they wanted to show me it. And they gave me like a pamphlet with English translation for the museum, which was really nice. Um, then I went to Bolzano and they had really interesting stuff too. My favorite museum I've ever been to was in Bolzano. It was in Piazza Vittoria, which means the Victory Plaza, and it's an Arc de Triomphe type of thing in the middle of the plaza that was commissioned by Mussolini. It was supposed to depict the South Tyrol, which is the region which Bolzano is in, was taken from Austria during this time, during the fascist period. And so this memorial was for this area, and the museum within the memorial, like underneath it, was incredible. And so there's a lot of value in that. I went to Trieste, and it was kind of underwhelming. There wasn't too much. A lot of World War One stuff there. Bologna was, uh, I was high hopes for Bologna because it was liberated by partisans and it had a museum. But when I get to the museum, I'm speaking to this guy in broken Italian, and he goes, um, we talked to the archivist at the library upstairs where the museum is supposed to be, and she goes, "It's not here anymore. They removed it." And so I thought that was fascinating. I was like, well, a city that's supposed to have this resistance identity does not have a museum anymore. So at this point, every single city had struck out in a way, except for Turin. So I returned to Turin for my last week and a half, 2 weeks almost. I kind of flown through a few cities, and so I spent some more time there, and it was great because I got to talk to people and make connections and kind of immerse myself in the city, and that's ultimately what I decided to do Turin as well.
And so that's fascinating, hearing just how it's compared or how remembrance compares between the different cities. One of the things I find to be really fascinating about your thesis is it's a tale about two different kinds of memory, both individual memory and collective memory, and how those two can either align or contradict. Were there points when you were in Turin, wandering around this place, um, that you had heard firsthand stories about, and you thought either the individual memory and the collective memory align, or the individual memory and the collective memory diverge?
Yeah, and so the funny thing is, um, I don't remember meeting. Actually, I don't think I met anybody that knew resistance fighters directly. I'm sure there were. I don't doubt that there were, but um, there was a group of friends that I met there. One of the guys, I was at a house. I can't remember his name. Um, his name is Pierre. That I can't. It was a politician resistance fighter. This guy, and his house was a historic house in Italy. And some guy that I met, I'm having trouble with the name because it's the friend is Pietro. And his one of his friends was a movie director, and he created a short. He's a student, created a student short film about this house. Um, like I'm sorry, I'm looking on the name, but and so that was pretty interesting to see kind of the collective memory, how I was observing the house through the museum's lens, and how he observed the house through his lens as a student was interesting. But I think the most valuable experience actually wasn't even in Turin at all. It was in Slovenia. I have a cousin in Slovenia, and so I visited her for a bit, and she lives in a really small village in Slovenia. If you're not familiar, the big city Ljubljana um, is kind of near Italy, but that's really only the big city I believe in besides some of the other tourist attractions. But she lives in a small village about an hour away from the city, so we had to drive there and back every day. But she took me into town, which was like a 15-20 minute walk, and it had the church, the post office, the bakery, the grocery store. All that was it. And she took me to a little like office space, office park type of thing, and it had a memorial in it, and um, it had this, it had a plaque, and it had all of the resistance fighters during the Yugoslavia um, kind of conflicts. And she was telling me how there's a map, and I can't remember the map's name, but there's a map that shows every single memorial in former Yugoslavia. And so there's these big memorials, like in Ljubljana, there's this big memorial that has, it looks like a flag almost, but it's people's bodies kind of waving in the air. And it's a very powerful memorial, and it's, again, it's about this conflict. And these little memorials though in the village, it was not even taller than me. And she was telling me how if you go village by village and you look at these memorials, you can kind of see, based on the language of the memorial, you can kind of see what the political leanings of the village. And it's because the people, like some of these villages are not Nazi sympathizers. And so you can see the way that um, the collective memory in the big city, right? The big memorial and how they choose to remember this conflict, and then you go individually to each village and you see this kind of like even more located memory of how this village chooses to remember a place, and then you can dive even deeper and you can go interview someone, you can talk to someone and see how they themselves remember. And so this is kind of the format of my really of my project too, is seeing how seeing a broader vision and then kind of incrementally going lower and lower. And so my map has 3 layers, and those 3 layers are supposed to represent a larger, smaller memory in a way.
Absolutely. And could you talk a little bit more about that map?
Mm,
Um, where can it be found for starters?
mm.
And then also what can people find there?
Yeah, so the map is called Remembering Turin. It's on ArcGIS Story Maps. It's, if you look it up, I'm sure it'll be one of the top results. But
Mhm.
the uh, the map itself is it's a two-dimensional map with multiple layers. So um, when you're looking at the map itself, you see the a map of Turin, obviously, and over the base layer of the map, there's it's a historic map called it's the bombing destruction from 1941 to 1945. And so Americans and Germans and pretty much everyone were bombing Italy during this time, and specifically Turin, because Turin had the Fiat factory. And the Fiat factory is extremely important for Germany at this time because they were supplying all of the cars for the German military. And they were fueling the Eastern Front as well. So it was very important that Germans kept this Fiat factory up and running constantly. And so, of course, Americans bombed it to death. Um, and so you see on this bombing destruction map, like there's parts of the city that are well destroyed, and then you look at the Fiat factory and it is decimated. There's another map I didn't include in this project, and it showed each individual bomb that was dropped, or at least where it hit. And there's a good amount everywhere. On the factory, there's hundreds. They were clearly aiming for this thing, but you can't be accurate from a plane, right? Especially in 1941, you're flying above a town, and the lights are off because they knew that there was going to be planes, and you think you know where the factory is, and you're dropping a bomb. Well, it's probably not going to hit the factory. And so much of the city was destroyed. And what's even worse is the bombs weren't things destroying the city; it was the fire after, right? So the the bombing, the map that shows where the bombs hit not only does not reflect what the Americans are trying to destroy or the Germans are trying to destroy, but also does not reflect the destruction itself. So I wanted something that reflected how people interact, how people could not be discriminated by this war, right? Everyone living in Turin was affected by the bombs no matter what. And so this is kind of the individual memory I was talking about, where everybody, in a way it's collective, but everyone had this experience where they were there and the bomb alarms went off and they had to go to the shelter because the bomb had dropped.
Yeah.
And so Marguerite has plenty of stories about this, and so I've recorded this in oral history. But that's the first layer. The second layer is Margarita herself. So I did this oral history with her, and I took as many points as I possibly could from that experience, and I put them on the map. Some of them overlaid with the third layer, but um, this this layer is supposed to be, again, this another individual layer of one person's experience, but she was also a partisan, so it wasn't everyone's experience, right? She was pretty unique. She was 15, so she was going to school, and she had her partisan ID with her while she was at school, and then she would go and she would ride her bike and she would go hand deliver a message or whatever she had to do that day. And then so I created a bunch of points for her, and I included sound bites from our interview. So when you go on the map and you click on a point that she of hers, you can listen to what she says about it, what she talks about it too, which was, I think, figuring that part out was my proudest moment within the project. But and then finally, there's the final layer is the supposed collective memory,
Yeah.
and I chose to define the collective memory based on the museum. What the museum, it's called the in Italian, it's the Diffuso Museo de Resistenza, which means like the diffused museum of resistance. And diffuse isn't really a word we use in history, but it basically means like the spread out museum of resistance. So the museum itself believes that the history lives within the walls of the city, and so that they can't just have a one museum that shows this. You need to go around the city. You need to see this thing for yourself, which I love. But they have a certain amount of points which were not easy to find. They have a certain amount of points around the city, and they have a walking tour and stuff like this that you can go on, but it's only available for a few months out of the year. And they have information on these sites and stuff like that. So I chose to use those as the kind of baseline. So this is supposedly what the city remembers, is what the museum is representing. If the museum properly represents the city, then this should be the collective memory. So it's kind of a tool to compare these three things, right?
Yeah. And so, uh, what were some of the points of divergence between Margarita's memory, that individual memory, and then the purported collective memory of the museum?
The biggest one that I found was, so she lived again. I don't think I could have found a better person to talk to, because she lived in a place called Mirafiori Sud, which means South Mirafiori, which is a neighborhood near the Fiat factory. She lived like a few blocks away, so of course she was getting a lot of these bombings. She again she lived a few blocks away, but she lived in this big neighborhood. When I was there, I met a lot of people from this neighborhood. This was not a lot of people lived in the city center, but many people lived in this neighborhood because a lot of people worked at the Fiat factory, so they would go to the Fiat factory. And so, but when I was there, the only um, point of memory or place of memory that the museum dedicated to that area was the Fiat factory. In the city center, there's about 30 that the museum depicted, and only one was in this neighborhood. In some of the other neighborhoods, there was maybe two. There was another neighborhood. I can't remember the name right now, but it's people told me it was the worst neighborhood in the city. Didn't have any. Another one of the neighborhoods by the train station that wasn't great had a few, but not too many. A lot of them were just in the city center, which makes sense for um, this walking tour, right? You want people to go see these places, but this is the thing, and this is the issue that I kind of highlighted was the it, because there's not a lot of memory within the outside of the city center, within the neighborhoods where people actually lived. The memory is kind of lacking here, where it's kind of really only subjected to the center because there's a emphasis on this walking tour and emphasis on tourism, which in a way, it it allows people to see it at all, right? If I'm going to a new city, I'm probably not going to go to the neighborhoods like where people live. I'm probably going to stay in the city center. But there's trade-offs here, right? And they made that big trade-off where we might not properly represent the entire city, but we're absolutely going to represent the city center, which I'm not going to say is a good or a bad thing, but Margarita's story kind of contradicts that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an interesting dilemma that um, you have between history and just pragmatic interest, where you want people to engage with history, but in order to do that, you have to make some concessions to them. And so seeing that play out in real time um, is really really fascinating to see. Um, so you put together this map.
Mhm.
Was Did you show Margarita the map? Did you have the opportunity to show it to her?
I did not. Um, yeah, so I had I kind of had the map done. I had a really like rough, kind of crude outline of the map,
Hmm.
and I knew it was a lot of the kind of just gathering the information and getting it presentable for my honors thesis, like the defense itself. And so this was March, early March. I think I defended on March 4th, I believe. And Margarita passed on the 27th of February, and I did not know she had passed. Was actually I was really busy the first half of the semester, and so I wanted to just get it done, get it finished, and then after my defense during spring break, I could go visit her. And I got a text literally the day after my thesis from a teacher with her funeral information. So it was heartbreaking in a way because I couldn't show her the final presentation. I had thought about this and I was like, I'm gonna print this thing out because I can't really, she can't see much. So she had to use a big, like magnifying machine, um, to see most things. So it would have been a struggle, but I was willing to make that struggle and I wanted to go see her again. And, fortunately she, tripped on her cat. And so she spent her last few days in bed, which is sad to hear, but no, I wish I was able to. But I am still in contact with her daughter, who I still help out from time to time. So it's not that you know it'll stay in the family type of thing, but it's not gonna. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to reach her in time.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking, but you did such an incredible thing, such an incredible act of service to her and to her family, um, articulating her, uh, or giving voice to showing how her lived experiences line up on a map like that when other more official accounts maybe don't. It's an incredible act of service that you did. Um, do you have going forward? Um, is this a thing I suppose I should ask that like other people are doing? Comparing individual memories with more collective official memories?
Um, I'm sure it is. I'm not directly aware of any project like
Yeah.
this, but I can't doubt that it is. I think Um, it's tough, especially to do a project of this depth, right, where you're talking to someone like this is hard. Especially, I mean, the there are only so many people left that you can talk to. The Arizona Jewish Historical Society, when I was interning for them, they were in the process of doing something similar to this, where they had it's called the Gutman series, and it's the Holocaust education series for the Historical Society, and so they interview. This is kind of my job, um, at least to help out with this and produce a series, was to interview people and try to get the testimony of the survivor and do a like a bi-monthly or bi-weekly presentation of this person's story and kind of um, I guess add it to the collected memory, if that makes sense. And now they didn't have a comparative aspect to it, right? It's just they presented this person's story and that was it, and that's great. And so you're kind of creating this comparative memory in someone's head,
Wow.
and this is more of an explicit like
Yeah.
kind of analysis of that.
What do you think, sort of on a more theoretical, more philosophical level? Um, what did this project teach you about memory and how collective memories are informed or are not informed by individual experience?
Um, I I think I'm sure you've heard me say this before, but I think that planning, like urban planning and much like memories, it's a trade-off. It's a game of trade-offs, right? And there's a huge trade-off you have to make here, where you physically can't depict everyone's story. And history, in a way, the way that it was defined to me in my freshman year of college was that the past is what objectively what happened, and history is you trying to tell the past as closely as you can, but you will never get to the past, right? You cannot be there and feel what people felt, see what people saw, and it was in the context of what happened. You can get pretty close, but you can't get there. And so, and I think the closest you can get there is talking to someone and making that connection with someone, um, but and within the if you're not if you don't have a connection like that, the city wants to have a mass, create this mass memory in the quote unquote right way, or the right way for them. You have to make trade-offs, right? And I spent a long time kind of thinking about Turin and what like do I think that they did the best thing they could have done? Ultimately, they're not gonna have Margarita be that's not gonna be the focal point of their memory. She if anything, she's more of an Arizona connection than she is or California connection than she is of a Italy connection. And so the they made trade-offs, and ultimately I can't be upset by them making the history the most accessible they could,
Yeah,
you know.
absolutely. Well, on that very profound note, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your work and your experiences. And for those who are interested in seeing that map and reading the thesis, engaging with it, where can they go to find more out about your work?
Well, and thank you, Jack. I appreciate you having me on. I think uh again, if you look up Remembering Turin, it's on ArcGIS Story Maps. If not, my LinkedIn has it, which is linked in Giovanni Barberio. So
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Gio. You have an excellent rest of your day.
you do too. Thank you, Jack.
All right, bye bye.
Bye.